Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the public hearing on the NWT emergency plans with our guests, the Honourable Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs, Vince McKay, and his witnesses. We are the Standing Committee on Accountability and Oversight. My name is Kieran Testarsh. I'm the member for Range Lake and the acting chair of the committee. And I'll allow members of the committee to introduce themselves, and then we'll turn over to our witnesses. And I'll start with Mr. Ajerikon, and then we'll do the virtual participants last. So we'll start.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Richard Ajerikon, MLA for Trinity Walidi.
Good morning, everyone. Robert Hawkins, MLA for Yellowknife Centre, and I'm happy to be here.
Hi, Julian Morse, MLA for Frame Lake. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kate Reed, and I'm the MLA for Great Slave.
Good morning. I'm Shauna Morgan, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Rogers.
Good morning and welcome. Danny Rogers, MLA in Nuvik Boot Lake.
Ms. Yakalaya.
Good morning. My name is Cheryl Yakalaya. I'm the member for Decho. Thank you.
Mr. Nersu.
Good morning, George Nersu, MLA for Mackenzie Delta. I'm meeting from Clavic this morning.
Ms. Whalen Armstrong.
Good morning. My name is Jane Whalen Armstrong, MLA for Mofi Riding in Cleacher Region. Thank you.
Thank you, members. I'll now turn to Minister McKay. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and good morning to the members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss with the committee updates to the NWT emergency plan that were publicly launched on Monday. Here with me today are Gary Brennan, the Deputy Minister to my left, Sonia Saunders, far right, Assistant Deputy Minister, and Emily King to my right here is the Director of Emergency Management, and Jeff Ray, my Ministerial Special Advisor in the back. The GNWT has learned from the past experiences, including last year's historic wildfire season and flood events of the previous past 2 years, and has updated its and improved emergency management practices according ahead of the 2024 high-risk season. Updates to the NWT emergency plan include revised language to better reflect the purpose of the plan, clarify roles and responsibility, and explain the escalation of responsibilities starting with individual level all the way up to federal support. The updated plan also outlines response and hosting costs of which community governments may be reimbursed when disaster assistance policy is applied, as well as the GNWT's approach to emergency-related communications. The GNWT's emergency management organization worked with all GNWT departments and agencies to review their functions within the NWT emergency plan to ensure accuracy and clarity. The updated plan was also shared with the Council of Leaders and the Northwest Territories Association of Communities. I'm confident the recent updates to the NWT emergency plan will result in a more consistent approach to emergency management in the Northwest Territories going forward. While this concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chair, if the committee agrees, the Director of Emergency Management is available to provide a more detailed, thorough presentation of the updated plan. After the presentation, I look forward to further discussion about the updated committee, update with committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Ms. King, you may proceed.
We'll move to slide 2. As a bit of a background, I'd like to touch on the framework for emergency management in the Northwest Territories. In the NWT, we have the Emergency Management Act, which assigns lead responsibility for emergency management to local authorities. This is best practice nationally and consistent with how other provinces and territories are structured. The reason for this is because Emergencies are most often handled by first responders at the local level, and community governments have the community government assets and own community government, direct community government staff to operate those assets. Under the Act, local authorities must have a community emergency plan and a local emergency management organization established. Community emergency plans guide how the local emergency management organization responds to emergency events. Within these plans, community governments can form arrangements with their local emergency management organization members, like Indigenous governments and non-government organizations, to support with elements of the response. So in parallel to this, we have the NWT emergency plan, which guides actions of the regional and territorial emergency management organization in support of local authorities when their capacity has been exceeded and assistance requested. Individuals, non-government organizations, and the private sector also have a role to play. So on slide 3, we'll look at the escalating structure for emergency management in the NWT. So we follow a comprehensive emergency management structure that mirrors all Canadian jurisdictions. The NWT emergency management system relies on everyone doing their part to prepare for, prevent, respond to, and recover from emergency events, beginning with individuals and families who are encouraged to develop household emergency plans, obtain insurance where available, and to protect their own property. This includes renters who are expected to have tenant insurance. Local authorities are responsible to coordinate their community emergency management activities, and they lead emergency responses at the local level. In the NWT, the vast majority of emergency events are handled at the local level by first responders without the need of support from the next level. So I want to highlight also that the NWT has a process to request assistance from other jurisdictions and the federal government. And this was this occurred last year. We requested assistance from other jurisdictions. And I want to clarify that where another jurisdiction is providing support to the NWT, it is under their control, and the NWT doesn't have authority over supportive actions that other provinces or territories may be offering. So last year, for example, we requested assistance with hosting capacity from Alberta, Manitoba, and Yukon. So we had no authority over identifying where evacuees would be placed. So on slide 4, I'd like to highlight the emergency plan is a living document. It's amended as necessary using lessons learned and best practices to ensure the territory and community governments are prepared and positioned to respond to evolving hazards. Efforts to update the emergency plan began in 2022, but they were put on hold last summer during the responses. So on slide 5, the NWT emergency plan is developed under the authority of the Emergency Management Act. Its purpose is to establish coordination and planning framework for emergencies that may affect all or part of the territory, and highlight how the GNWT, through the regional and territorial emergency management organizations, supports local authorities where their capacity has been exceeded and assistance is requested. So the NWT emergency plan is only activated once we get a request from the local authority and their capacity has been exceeded. The majority, like I mentioned, of emergencies are handled at the local level, and they don't require activation of the territorial emergency plan. Within the NWT emergency plan, we have guiding principles and priorities that guide our decision-making for every event. And those are consistent across each event and consistent across Canada. So priorities, the top priority is the safety of first responders. For example, that needs to always remain the top priority. Second priority, as an example, is safety of residents. So on slide 6, local authorities, being community governments, are responsible for developing their own emergency plans, which guides their responses.
We're having some technical issues, but committee members have access to the presentation, so you can just proceed. Just let us know what page you're on.
Okay.
Ms. King.
Thank you. I'm on slide 6. So as I mentioned, local authorities, being community governments, are responsible for their own emergency plans, which guides their actions and their activities during a response. The NWT emergency plan does not articulate the activities of local authorities. It doesn't dictate how local authorities will respond, nor does it remove any existing mandates. I'll move to slide 7. As mentioned, the NWT emergency plan is a living document that's updated as needed based on lessons learned and best practice. This update, the 2024 update, incorporates recommendations from the 2021 Flood After Action Review, lessons learned from the 2021 and 2022 flood season. It incorporates feedback and input from the Territorial Emergency Management Organization. And it also incorporates opportunities for improvement that we identified following the 2023 wildfire season that we had the ability to implement prior to the next, to the 2024 risk season. We wanted to ensure everyone understands their roles and responsibilities, and that everyone is prepared to respond to future events if required. So finally, we've been getting requests for clarity around what types of expenses may be eligible if the disaster assistance policy is applied to an event. And as the minister mentioned, the new emergency plan had been circulated to the Northwest Territories Association of Communities Board and the Council of Leaders for review and feedback. I'll move to slide 8. So as the plan is based on existing powers and authorities under the current NWT Emergency Management Act, no changes were made to community government or GNWT roles and responsibilities. No changes have been made to the overall structure for emergency management in the NWT. And the GNWT remains committed to supporting local authorities where their capacity has been exceeded. Moving to slide 9. So some of the changes to the emergency plan include an overall reorganization and restructuring to improve clarity and flow. We've taken operational content that was more suitable for standard operating procedures, and we've pulled that out. And we felt it was important to speak to the roles and responsibilities of individuals. Again, individuals play a very important role in emergency management and are expected to have insurance where available, to have household emergency plans and property insurance, and have kits as well. I'll move to slide 10. So the Emergency Management Act defines local authorities as municipal councils or an authority that the minister recognizes as representative of the community for the purposes of the Act. So I'd like to highlight that in 10 cases, Indigenous governments in the NWT actually are the local authority. So the Emergency Management Act requires local authorities to have a community emergency plan and have a local emergency management organization. So where the Indigenous government is not the local authority, they're encouraged to work with the local authority as a local emergency management organization member. A template has been provided to all local authorities and Indigenous governments to help it with forming arrangements to support the community emergency management activities. I'll move to slide 11. So the NWT emergency plan has clarified how requests for assistance are made. Requests for support at all levels is contingent on resources being fully exhausted. So for example, local resources must be fully committed prior to requesting assistance from the regional emergency management organization. That same need to exhaust resources is mirrored at all levels. So territorial EMO will assess the need to issue a request for assistance to other jurisdictions, to other provinces and territories through our established emergency management mutual aid agreements as appropriate, and the NWT EMO at the territorial level may also issue a request for federal assistance. Again, all of which is contingent on the NWT fully exhausting its capacity. I'll move to slide 12. So in the updated emergency plan, states of emergency have been clarified, including who may declare and through what mechanism. So it's important to note the state of emergency is a tool used to access special powers required to respond to an event. Not all emergencies will require a state of local emergency to be declared, and in the majority of cases, this is handled at the local level. There's been very few natural disasters in the history of the NWT requiring a state of emergency be declared by the minister. I think it's been, in the last 20 years, I believe it's been 84 events requiring the regional or territorial emergency management organization to activate in support of local authorities, and in only 2 cases has the minister declared a state of emergency. So on slide 13, so the updated emergency plan clarifies the activation levels of the regional and territorial emergency management organizations and what they mean. So when we're in a monitoring phase, there's no formalized incident management team stood up. There's no requirement for surge staff from across GNWT to come in and support the territorial EMO, and there's no situation reports issued. For partial and full activation, we do activate an incident management team, and we do often pull on surge staff from other departments to support the emergency management organization. And we do regular reporting, situation reporting, and meetings. The difference between partial and full activation is the scale of the incident management team stood up. So the incident management team is flexible and is expanded and grows in line with the scale and scope and complexity of the emergency event. I'll move to slide 14. So in prior years, staffing the incident management team with NWT staff was a challenge. Folks may not have had the appropriate training, and it resulted in staff burnout and high overtime costs. Changes have been made to how the GNWT and how regional and territorial emergency management organizations pull surge staff in to support those incident management teams, as well as how we pull in subject matter experts as necessary. Okay, I'll spend some time on
Thank you, Ms. King. So just, you've exceeded the allotted time for your presentation as per protocols, but given that committee's keenly interested in this, does committee agree to allow the witnesses to complete the presentation, then we'll go to questions? Thank you, committee. I just want to be mindful that committee may have lots of questions to ask, and I don't want to cut into their time. But you may proceed to conclude your presentation, Ms. King.
So slide 15, the next two slides are really to highlight key areas that are of significant update. So the first is the evacuation and hosting guidelines, which articulate how the GNWT will support local authorities in the event of an evacuation where capacity is exceeded. We heard from community governments that there's a need to outline the types of costs that may be reimbursed if the disaster assistance policy is applied to an event. So we added that list to the updated guidelines. By clarifying what local authorities may be reimbursed for, local authorities can engage with Indigenous organizations and other local EMO partners in the planning phase and may enter into arrangements to support those certain response activities such as provision of food services or hosting supports for evacuees. When planned in advance, these arrangements help alleviate the burden on local authorities. And it's important to note that no agency has the capacity to do this alone. Pooling of resources is critical. So some of the examples of items that would be eligible for reimbursement include overtime costs of community government employees providing response functions during an event, salaries for casual staff hired specifically to support the response, transportation services, accommodations costs, etc. It's important to note that where commercial accommodations are limited, they should be prioritized for evacuees that are not suitable for congregate lodging or cot sleeping. There's some examples of items that are not reimbursable under the DAP. They include regular staff salaries, honorarium, gifts, cash allowances, electronics, etc. When it comes to evacuations, we've articulated some guiding principles. They include evacuate only when necessary, meet essential basic needs of evacuees, ensure fiscal responsibility. One point on the fiscal responsibility side is we're aware that the Department of Finance is undertaking a review of their financial supports that they put in place to support evacuees last year. I believe there'll be what we heard report that will inform any future evacuee financial support programs. Moving to slide 16, the The second area of significant update is the communications annex. While community emergency plans outline how local authorities will communicate with residents, this annex outlines how GNWT, when activated at the regional or territorial level, will communicate. One example of what has changed is we now have an expanded structure contemplated in the communications annex, and we now have a lot more experience using the public alerting system. It was quite new in the last update in 2018. I'll mention we're aware that EIA is working with Indigenous governments on a communications protocol regarding emergency responses as well. So finally, on slide 17, I'll highlight that the Department of Executive and Indigenous Affairs is leading an after-action review on the 2023 wildfire emergency response activities. Public communities, Indigenous governments, and others will have an opportunity to provide feedback. Future updates to the plan and any other supporting materials will be driven and informed by the recommendations from that after-action review. Slide 18, departments are responsible for emergencies that fall within their mandate and are responsible to have business continuity plans as well as emergency plans. The NWT emergency plan has a section outlining rules and responsibilities specific to emergency management for each department. Slide 19. So in conclusion, I'll touch on some of the activities we've been undertaking in preparation for the 2024 risk season. One includes updating standard operating procedures. Departments have been encouraged to update their standard operating procedures. The EMO has reviewed ours, including how we stand up and resource incident management teams, how we contract logistical supports, requests for federal assistance. We've reviewed a protocol with ECC, the Environment and Climate Change Fire Management Division, to clarify how we communicate about wildfires and how we notify communities as well. We've issued a call for surge staff to GNWT departments. Now we have a database of approximately 95 staff within GNWT that can be called upon to help out with the incident management teams when they're stood up. And we've described the position descriptions for incident management team positions with HR. We have a incident command system training plan for GNWT surge staff. We're tracking training and qualifications of those staff. To date, we've provided incident command system training to all 5 regional emergency management organizations, the territorial, as well as executives and cabinet, as well as MLAs. With regards to business continuity planning, each entity is responsible for the development of their own business continuity plan. The EMO has developed and shared a resource containing guidance on business continuity planning and some of the scenarios that GNWT departments should be planning for. Again, departments are all responsible for their own business continuity plans for a wide range of hazards that could impact their ability to continue essential operations. Finally, we've been focusing on helping community governments build their local capacity for emergency management. So we conduct emergency planning and tabletop exercises with community governments. Thus far, since 2023 risk season, we've done 11 workshops with communities, and we have 2 more on the books for later this month. We have a community emergency planning template, as well as a video series. The video series is publicly available. We continue to test our public alerting system, and we've updated the community emergency plan template with templates for forming arrangements with Indigenous governments and non-government organizations to support local emergency management operations. We're aware that the City of Yellowknife will be hosting a meeting with non-government organizations as well to discuss lessons learned from last year, potential gaps, and plans moving forward. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. King. We have until 11:30 with our witnesses today committee. So I'll now turn to committee members for questions, and we'll start with Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses here today, Minister and staff. That is, this is obviously a significant topic of concern, front of mind of most Northerners. So whether you live in Sachs Harbor or you live in Kikiza, I mean, everybody's concerned to some degree on this effort, and depending on how close you were to the last year's incident, you're more concerned, clearly. One of the biggest concerns, I want to avoid the word criticism, but one of the biggest concerns, of course, is the equity of emergency management plans and the lack of transparency thereof. And what I'm hearing is the department supports them, but yet I'm not 100% clear on what that really means. I mean, the last slide, on slide 19, pointed out the development appendices and community emergency plan template. But as we all know, it's like asking what's, define a piece of string. Like, I mean, it comes in many forms. So in other words, without high-level detail, I mean, you get what you get. So that said, there was a lot of criticism, whether it was fair or unfair. The City of Yellowknife had a 6 or 7 page emergency plan, whereas in comparison is more the issue where Hay River might have had a 26 page emergency plan. And it's not specific about the number. The issue is there was a stark difference in the sense of that. The City of Yellowknife may have felt that that was sufficient, and it's not for me to particularly say that, but the same token is, one would say, why is Hay River's 2, 3, or 4 times longer than the City of Yellowknife's, given the size of the community and the resources? So which there then leads me to where I'm getting to my question, which is why isn't MACA specifically helping design these community emergency plans? And I've phrased it to the point of saying to the 70 to 90% essence, and allow the individual municipality, whether they're in Paulituck or in Simpson, to define the elements of the actual local resources and people and personnel, and then causing them to be transparent on the MACA website. So all citizens have the benefit of this information, and thereon itself is part of the solution, not the full solution, but that provides the surety, confidence in the community that they're there, and I can assure you there will, no matter what you put up, whether it's a 1 page or 1,000 pages, there will always be those critical, and we will never be able to satisfy them. But that said, it creates the transparency and the surety the general public are looking for. In essence, where is MACA's role in this, and if they are doing it, where is MACA's role in this? That's clear and transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Minister, I'll allow you to respond, but if you'd like one of your witnesses to provide further content, just let me know. Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start and then I'll hand it off here. But I think the main thing behind this is to realize that every emergency plan is a living, breathing document. These things can change depending on the scope of the emergency. And the reality is if you use Hay River and Yellowknife as an example, I think Hay River has an emergency just about every year, and whether it be or breakups or whatever. So we're always, and having sat on council some of those times, are always updating it. And some communities may not have that opportunity to update their emergency plans I'll just leave it at that, and I'll pass it off to Emily if you'd like to add to that. Thank you.
Ms. King.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to clarify that MACA doesn't currently have the authority under the Emergency Management Act dictate how a community emergency plan is written and what's articulated. We do have the template which makes suggestions on what elements should be included in an emergency plan. And we do offer these workshops, which include an introduction to emergency planning on day 1, and day 2 is really walking through the development or update of an emergency plan. So we definitely have encouragement and recommended sections to include, but ultimately it is the authority of the community government to determine their emergency plan contents.
Thank you, Ms. King. And please conclude any statements with thank you, which lets our tech know to switch over. Mr. Hawkins, do you have a follow-up?
Certainly. Thank you for fleshing that a little more. I consider that, I don't consider it overreach that the Department of MACA would create the structure and then pass it on. If you're deeming they need to have emergency plans, then they need to have the resources, and you'll get what you get. Whether it's a 1-page or a 26-page, or one could argue, well, my plan's in that. My suggestion to the department is that they stop the suggestion to create a detailed framework structure and say you fill in the gaps as necessary. So in other words, MACA leads the emergency plans, pass it on to local and indigenous governments and say fill in your details. So whether that means knowing, I'm not an emergency plan guy, so I'm not going to go into too many examples, but knowing what to do, who to call, I mean, those are important things. Giving it to, say, for example, the City of Yellowknife or the town, community of Trout Lake, let them specify their contacts or who the actuals are. But the hardcore, larger process and paperwork, including the transparency of publicly having it available for citizens, really should fall on MACA. And I would pose that suggestion to the minister on developing the 70 to 90% of every single plan, passing it on to the local authorities and allowing them to dial into the specifics, because what may be relevant in Jean Marie may not be relevant in Holituck. And I fully recognize that, but none of these municipalities have the financial wherewithal to meet the demands as we are seeing today, and a one-pager just simply doesn't cut it. And I'm not trying to impress upon, as I finish, Mr. Chairman, that City of Yellowknife or Let's Okay or any of those communities have a simple one-pager. I'm just saying an oversimplified plan doesn't cut it by today's standards of requirements of information and transparency. Hence, I'm saying MACA should lead that role with a detailed plan, a detailed framework, and allowing everyone to have the same standards so we all know what we're working with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take those comments as they are. I think there is the responsibility for all of us to communicate. However, like Emily was saying, we don't have the legal obligation to tell any community how to write their emergency plan. Although there's always the openness from the department to work with the communities. And maybe I'll just pass this to Emily if she wants to add anything else to that. Thank you.
Ms. King.
Thank you. I would just like to clarify that the emergency plan template that we do provide to community governments is quite detailed and outlines all of the sections that are recommended for inclusion in their emergency plans. And when doing a workshop, the result is a commitment from MACA to fill in the draft template as a 90% complete type plan and hand it off to the community government to formalize. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Mr. Hawkins, anything further?
No, I think, well, it's up to you. You're the chairperson. Usually we've been sticking with 2, so I'll come back to it as necessary. But I will say, only because I have the mic on, I think regardless of what has been said about the authority, I think it's to some context, abrogating some level of responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. And we'll now turn to Ms. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all you folks for a fine presentation. As the minister knows, I've sent in some requests when it comes to the responsibilities of non-government organizations in their emergency planning and seeking the capacity to fill out these templates that you have available. So from my understanding from your presentation, and please clarify if I'm incorrect, Minister, the local authorities, and in this case, where in my writing would be the City of Yellowknife, would work with civil society, NGOs, et cetera, businesses possibly, to develop their plans and see how that feeds into the local context. But I'm curious if there's anything that MACA would be supportive of these organizations, how they will better work with NGOs, the private sector even, to better incorporate their needs during planning for these events for business continuity. Are you pointing us to those same templates and tools? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Mr. Minister.
Thank you. I think one thing to keep in mind here too, I mean, this is a territorial document, and we got to, take into every consideration all the NWT NGOs. There's always the will of the department to work with these organizations to make sure that they have the information, and maybe we have to send them or direct them towards a local government for assistance. I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to this plan, nobody's going to know it better than somebody in Fort Simpson, or nobody's going to know it better than somebody in Jean Marie River. It's not going to be for us as a government or territorial government to tell this NGO they have to do this. So maybe what I'll do is I'll pass it off to the minister here, and if he wants to direct it somewhere else, he can.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so further to what the minister just said there, the GNWT is actually undertaking an exercise currently to make sure all departments have their own BCPs updated. And the BCP is not an emergency plan. It talks about all different types of emergencies, of course, right, and what you do in each case and who you need to respond, whether it's a cyber attack, a flood, fire, whatever the case may be. As part of that, the relevant departments are reaching out to their NGOs to provide support to their NGOs for development of their BCPs. That won't capture everyone, but it'll capture the ones that the GNWT has a relationship with. That work is underway right now. I'm not quite sure the status of it, but it is definitely underway. And then again, as the minister alluded to, the local authorities are also working with them, and we provide them with the same templates that can be provided to the NGOs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hey, sorry. Thank you, Ms. Reed.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that information. That's really great to hear. So I guess I'll just ask publicly. I've asked privately, but is there any resources or capacity or places that MACA can point NGOs to help fill out their own emergency response plans and business continuity plans? I'm speaking as someone who has built these kinds of plans for a very small scale, a building instead of an organization, but they can be quite onerous, can take a lot of time, time and effort, like I think even a year or two to develop properly. So is there any sort of capacity building that we can be pointing these organizations to feel like they're more secure in their planning? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pass this off to Emily, please.
Ms. King.
Thank you. Yeah. So two things I would say. There's that workshop that Yellowknife will be hosting with NGOs to discuss business continuity planning and improvements and opportunities to learn from last year, where resources will be discussed. The other thing is when it comes to business continuity planning, there are a lot of resources available online. Business continuity planning is really dependent on the nature of your business And so I would say reaching out to partner NGOs that offer similar supports would be a great place to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Mr. Morse, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. I guess, yeah, my first question is similar to a few that have already been asked, but something that I would note that I think is probably the widest spread kind of lesson learned coming out of last year is a lot of different organizations, GNWT, municipalities, NGOs were somewhat caught off guard, realizing that their emergency planning was insufficient in some way or another last year when we faced a major evacuation event. And yeah, going forward, I guess the thing I think I've found most confusing as this plan has been released, and I'm starting to learn more about emergency planning, as I'm sure a lot of folks are. The thing that I'm kind of seeing is the still sort of standing issue is the interaction of all these various individual emergency plans. Because at the end of the day, it's fine to say, you know, this individual NGO is responsible for their plan, the city's responsible for theirs, or the municipality is, and then it goes to MACA. But at the end of the day, I mean, when something goes down and somebody's plan isn't working particularly well or is insufficient, this all does end up getting downloaded onto the top level EMO, which is you guys. So I guess what I'm mostly wondering is, how is your department handling the coordination of all this and ensuring that we are better coordinated now going forward? I'll leave that as my first question.
Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm going to do the technical part of this. I'll pass this off to Emily, if that's okay.
Ms. King.
Yeah, I'd like to highlight we have developed annexes that lay out how arrangements should be can be formed between NGOs and partner organizations at the local level, and that should be feeding into community emergency plans. So for example, an NGO would fill out this template and form an agreement with the city, in the city's case. Having those articulated and on paper as a formalized arrangement should help. Another thing we're doing at the GNWT level is bolstering our capacity to expand our incident management teams, as well as our communications function within that team. So we've, in the annex, communications annex, we've articulated how we will have a joint information center. So where any responding agency will send their communication staff, and we will all group together in this joint information center. And that's something that we stood up, and that's best practice around Canada to support with that coordination piece at all levels. Thank you.
Mr. Morse.
Thank you. So, you know, leading into our kind of coming wildfire season, which I think is on top of everyone's mind and is very soon, you know, fingers crossed, as everyone's are, that it's not a bad one. But has MACA done any kind of gap analysis on where there are existing plans, if there are existing plans, whether they're going to work well together? How is that kind of being coordinated? So are you doing any kind of drilling or any kind of practice to kind of sort of lay out, here's a scenario, say there's a widespread evacuation again or something like that. Are you kind of doing an analysis of the plans that you know are existing and identifying places where plans aren't identified, reaching out to those organizations, ensuring that they do get a plan in place? Can you kind of just describe how that coordination is happening now so that we don't have to do it on the fly in the case of an incident? Thanks.
Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think throughout the year, I think you could, well, I shouldn't say throughout the year, but the last little while, I'm sure you've seen like all the training that the department's been doing and the communication with the local governments, so like the ICS training, all that stuff. So the communication's been out there to all the governments to start working on their plans, to start preparing for the worst case scenario. I don't know at what capacity that the local governments have been reaching out and asking for assistance, but I know that I'm going to be blunt and say the door's always open with MACA and the emergency plan stuff. So we've been reaching out, we've been advertising and campaigning to support this. I'll hand this over to Gary if he wants to add anything else, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I think what you're asking is, what are we doing to check on people that are, again, on the community, see how they're doing and what gaps might exist out there. And like our superintendents are in the communities working with the local EMOs and the regional EMOs on a regular basis to, help ensure they have plans. Like the communities are not left to their own. We don't say, here's your plan, or, this is your responsibility. We're working with them through all events, whether it's a territorial level or not, on the ground level. And so like just as an example, with the city of Yellowknife now, our superintendent in Yellowknife is meeting with the city on a regular basis about their plan, as they're going through some major updates through their activities now, right? So we're doing that. I don't know if we have a framework per se, but our staff are doing it on a regular basis, meeting with the local communities. Like one of the higher risk areas we believe this year, based on our forecast, is in the DHO. So our staff are participating in the local meetings to go through that there. I know the community of Fort Simpson was actually, we were working with them on some plans for what's going to happen if they need to evacuate, because they are deemed to be a higher risk. So we're doing it on the ground, but I just don't think that we have a framework of it. If I'm mistaken on that, please let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do want to say to start out that I am alarmed. I'm concerned. It seems that the objective of this update to the plan was to provide clarity and provide assurance to people. And I certainly, myself reading it, I don't think anyone in the public is going to read this and say, great, now I have clarity. That's, I think it's still at the level of theories and frameworks, but people are still asking, okay, but I need to know, what the roles are, what the options are, what resources are available. And I think in the case of Yellowknife in particular, I'm just going to focus on Yellowknife for a moment, because I think there's a glaring absence in the plan to acknowledge that Yellowknife plays a very different role than any other NWT community in the case of a major emergency. And so the plan just kind of treats all local authorities the same and imagines that they would all have similar roles and respond in similar ways to an emergency. But I mean, Yellowknife is listed as the ultimate evacuation center to host evacuees from any other community. I know the first step would be go to regional centers, and in some cases that is, Yellowknife is the direct first stop. But if Fort Simpson needs to get evacuated, they're all coming to Yellowknife. If Betchico needs to get evacuated, or any of the other Cliccio communities, they're all coming to Yellowknife. If Inuvik needs to get evacuated, they're coming to Yellowknife. So also Yellowknife being one of the major transportation or supply chain hubs, that if there's a major emergency affecting Yellowknife, it's affecting a majority of the rest of the territory. The fact that Yellowknife is the location for some of our biggest territorial facilities or institutions, Stanton Hospital, the Correctional Center. And there's also sort of this assumption in the plan that local authorities will try to manage on their own, and then if they can't, the GNWT will be somewhere else that's safe, and they'll be able to kind of step in and help and take over. But there's not this acknowledgement that Yellowknife is the headquarters, the seat of government, and so like the people who are in the top decision-making roles and administrators in MACA, you're in Yellowknife, like you're not somewhere else that can then kind of step in and help. You're going to be amidst the chaos of the sort of major emergency that's befalling us. So I believe that the emergency plan needs to acknowledge the unique role that the Yellowknife plays within the territory, and then imagine how scenarios are going to play out. So for example, if there's an evacuation of Yellowknife, I don't think any of us can or should pretend that somehow the city of Yellowknife as a local authority is going to manage that on its own. I can't imagine any possibility that that could happen. So I think we need to just acknowledge that straight off the bat and not say, oh, well, if you guys can't handle it, we'll step in. Just plan right from the get-go how the NWT and the city and other players are going to work together if there's an evacuation of Yellowknife. So I guess my first question is, do you agree that the NWT emergency plan needs to acknowledge the unique role that Yellowknife plays during any major emergency in the territory, particularly one that involves multiple communities outside Yellowknife or one that directly threatens Yellowknife? So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Mr. Minister.
Thank you. To answer that question, no. The reality is the emergency plan is a territorial emergency plan. Now, what has to happen is the city of Yellowknife and MACA should work together, which they are, and which they will continue to do, to basically come up with a plan on the evacuation processes and the evacuation center. This plan is territory-wide. It has to cover all the territories and all the emergencies and all the planning processes. That being said, I mean, just to avoid a background, I've been in emergency services 30 years. I've done many emergencies. I've been through many evacuations, many community emergencies, many local issues. You know, I'd have to say if I'm following the way these things are working, the NWT emergency plan is great. It covers off what needs to be covered off. It's the local stuff like the emergency plan of Hay River that goes into the fine detail, when to trigger the next step and all that stuff. So, I mean, I'm not trying to say that the city of Yellowknife is the main core of everything that's going to happen emergency-wise. You know, unfortunately, Enterprise become an evacuation center for Hay River a few times. So, evacuation center for Hay River a few times. So, they do change, and we can't build in an emergency plan. You can't build in an emergency plan every fine detail of what could happen in an emergency. That just doesn't cover off in an emergency plan. I'll check with any other staff that want to add to this. No, that's good. Okay.
Looks like you did a good job, Mr. Minister. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next person, but I'll put you on the list for another question. Ms. Morgan, Mr. Jerrigan.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for your presentation. My question would be is that, as you know, Ford Resolution has been under third-party management for nearly a year now, and I've been asking that that the department will work with the community to do a fire plan. And in March of this year, their community had a meeting, but the SEO didn't show up. My understanding that he's leaving the community, and I'm not sure what's going on there. But there are concerns in Ford Resolution about fire smarting the community and that kind of thing. But so I hear what you're saying, more or less to say that, well, we don't want to interfere with the community. They're going to do their own thing, etc. But in this case, the third-party management is under your department. And to this day, a year later, I still don't have a fire plan. And I don't see the SEO stepping up to deal with this issue, because I know his plate's probably full. But at the same time, you know, we need to have community meetings with the community on the state of the affairs of the hamlet, including what's happening with the fire plan. So I'm not sure what's going on there. So maybe if you could just touch base or let me know here, because I need to know. I just got off the phone with the chief here, and he's a little upset about that there is no fire plan in place, and you can't really do much if the SEO that's there is not doing his job. So I want to know what can we do to improve the fire plan for this fiscal year. And I don't want to hear from you to say that, oh, well, it's in the works. We don't want to deal with this because it's a community problem. It's our problem. Thank you.
Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to hand this off to Emily. Or Sonia? Sonia?
Ms. Saunders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. So yes, the community report resolution is under our administration by MAC at this particular point in time, and we are. I just want to say we are planning to have a community meeting in the very near future and provide an update to the residents of Fort Resolution. So that's something that's in the works. I don't have details on the fire plan with me at this moment, but we'll definitely undertake to ensure that we provide that update to the community when we have a community meeting. That being said, I do know that a fair bit of work was done over the winter on fire breaks around the community, and there is a fairly significant fire break, I believe, around the community now at this point. But further, we can provide information at the public meeting about the emergency plan and where that's at, and make sure that people are aware of what the plans are for the season. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jericon.
There's going to be a letter coming to you from the chief as a result of the committee meeting you had in March for about $191,000 for equipment and safety gear and all that stuff needed to get the community engaged in the event there's a fire. So there'll be a letter coming to you on that issue. The other thing I mentioned to you before is that I asked the finance minister that this government has spent $270 million on the 2023 fire season. Given the fiscal constraint of this government going into the 2024 fire season now, but overall the GNWT is going to make a reduction of $150 million over a 4-year period at $600 million. How is this going to impact your efforts to work with communities to deal with the fire season? Is that going to have an impact on your department? You as a minister are going to have to make reductions. So I just want to know where are the reductions, and is that going to affect this fire season? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jericon. Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to do the technical side of this. I'll pass it off to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the question, and the government is going through a sustainability exercise for sure. Nothing has been approved at this time, so I certainly can't speak to any details that may be in the plan. But in terms of MACA support and the emergency management support, we do rely on the GNW or the federal government when there is an emergency to fund the majority of our costs, and that won't change. So we don't anticipate there to be any reduction of services if that's a concern in terms of any emergency support that we are planning. So I think that we can see the same level of support throughout the life of this government, regardless of the fiscal sustainability. It's been my experience in this government, and very brief at MACA, but is that when an emergency happens, we tend to respond regardless of the costs, and I think that's a fairly safe thing to put on the table for responses going forward. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. I have 3 brief questions, and then I'll turn over to Mr. Rogers. First, your slide 19, you have a bullet on the business continuity plan review. When do you anticipate that review will be complete? Who should I turn to? Mr. Minister. Mr. Brennan? Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do believe the first working group meeting took place yesterday or earlier this week of all departments reviewing business continuity plans. So how it's going down is that each department developed their own, and a decision was made to get all the groups together to make sure that we're speaking the same language and identify gaps that may exist and have some interdepartmental coordination. And as of right now, we expect that by the middle of May, those there would be finalized. Work continues to be ongoing, and identification of essential staff is happening now, but the anticipated finish date is the middle of May. Thanks.
Thank you. Can you make those plans or some sort of overall review available to the committee when they are complete? I'll turn to the minister for this.
Go on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And then we'll answer. Thank you.
First of all, I can only speak for MACA's business continuity plan, and the answer is I don't really know what we can share. We can look into see what we can share, and obviously, if we're able to share, we certainly will. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. When will the ICS training plan for the identified staff be completed? Because you're developing the plan, and we heard a few details from Ms. King. Ms. King?
Yep, the training plan is completed. It will take an estimated 4 years to complete the actual training up to a point where we maintain in future years past year 4.
Thank you. And finally, you have indicated you've completed workshops in 11 communities with 2 pending. Can you give us the names of those communities? If you don't have it handy, you just commit to providing it in writing, Ms. King.
Yeah, I don't have those now. We can get back to you on that. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. So the 11 that have been completed and the 2 pending. Okay. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Much appreciated. I appreciate that that MACA does not provide specific instructions to municipal and Indigenous government emergency plans, but I will state that communication obviously is the key. And one of the things we had heard from Indigenous governments, from municipalities, and members of the community that communications were an issue during the last disaster, the last wildfire season. You mentioned in your comments that you're bolstering communications. I'm just curious if you can elaborate a little on that. I'm sure there'll be some recommendations coming out of the after action review, but are there any lessons learned to date, I guess, prior to that review being done? And if you could speak to that bolstering communications, will that be, you see that as a territorial office you had mentioned, will that just be for emergency measures coordination? Or do you anticipate that being kind of a comms area as well, where you'll invite, I guess, participation either obviously virtually or there from other regions to ensure that the communications that are going out are timely and are timely with what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. King?
So I'll mention that the communications annex that was updated shows how our communications section, when we are activated, gets expanded as and when needed, and the roles and responsibilities of those positions. It also articulates how, when there's multiple agencies involved, we'll establish a joint information center and invite all responding agencies to bring their communicators to that forum to improve communications between all responding agencies. I'll mention MACA and ECC have reviewed our wildfire event notification protocol, which articulates how the 2 departments touch base regarding wildfires that pop up, and how we inform community governments of those wildfire threats. We do rely on local authorities and their local emergency management organizations to communicate as per their local plans. And I will also mention that we're aware the Department of Indigenous and Executive Affairs is working on a communications protocol with Indigenous governments that stood up in the event of an emergency as well. Thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, and thank you for that. So it's good to know that there actually comms people at that communications, I guess, center, which I think is important. Just a quick other one, Mr. Chair. Just clarity. You mentioned during your presentation, you made note to highlight that when other jurisdictions are providing support, we have no authority where evacuees will be placed. Just for clarity. So when we are reaching out to another province or territory, was your point there is that they decide where evacuees go if they indeed agree to accept? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. King to the presentation.
Yeah, that's correct. When we request assistance from another jurisdiction, it is up to them to determine where, for example, for hosting supports, where evacuees will be going to be hosted. And the reason for that is hosting capacity in any given community will be impacted by day-to-day events. So for example, if there's a Calgary stampede, Calgary likely won't be able to help with hosting. So it's really up to our counterparts in Alberta or any other jurisdiction to engage their communities and do a scan of who can take how many evacuees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I'll leave some remaining time for some other folks here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Whalen Armstrong, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to the minister and his staff for the presentation. So I just want to ask, I know that Fire 2023 was a disaster and was a chaos. And we know that it disrupted a lot of services, people's life and communities were affected in the whole process. We know that. So I just wanted to ask the minister, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, there's other communities too as well, they would like to know. So if all 33 communities developed and implemented an emergency plan, and which communities are priorities, and or if there's some regions or communities that still lack readiness to respond to the emergency events. Thank you.
Ms. King.
Yeah, thank you. MACA maintains a database of communities of community emergency plans. So we have a good understanding of the latest version submitted to MACA, some of which are quite old and may require updates, some of which are newer. So we do have that database. And I'll highlight that when we do our scan of this database, we identify communities that may have outdated emergency plans, and we prioritize our supports and reaching out to those communities for targeted workshops. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whalen Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you. It would be nice to see that list, just so that we know that, the communities are on track. I would like to see that. But another one too is that in your presentation, what has, it says here, one of your, the presentation that you just did, what has been updated? And this is for the role of the individual. You said here that have a household emergency plan, maintain an emergency kit, etc., protect properties, and obtain insurance if available. In small communities, there's still a lot of communities that do not have house insurance. And when we were traveling last year, and when I went to visit one of the upland communities, people there were really concerned because they were one of the communities that were evacuated. And they said that they are affected. They are very concerned that they don't have house insurance. And some of the communities that we visited said that they can have they have vehicles insurance, but they cannot obtain or get house insurance because the communities does not have a fire hydrant or the community does not have a fire department. So those were some of the resources or some of the infrastructures. Because of that, they cannot obtain house insurance. So I just wanted here and then in Enterprise too, 4 infrastructures were burned here in my community, and 3 out of 4 can rebuild. 1 cannot rebuild because due to no house insurance, and same thing with Enterprise. So if people had access to insurance, they can rebuild. And GNWT, they have insurance on all the infrastructures in small communities, in all the communities. We know that they have insurance. So I just want to know if MACA are working with the communities on upgrading their infrastructures so people can have access to house insurance. So that was the problem. That was a concern of many of the people in the small communities, because that's life in small communities that not too many people have access to insurance. Unlike Yellowknife, yes, because there's value on all those properties. We have values on all our properties, but it's just that we don't have any insurance. We can't get insurance for many of our small communities. They would like to get insurance, but because of the we don't have we lack a lot of infrastructures that major centers have. So I just want to know if MACA are working with the communities, with small communities, so that people can have access to house insurance. Thank you.
Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. So just to make sure, give a fulsome answer there, people who cannot get insurance in communities where insurance is not available to them because of the infrastructure, they're covered under the disaster assistance policy. If something was to happen to them and our DAP was activated, they would be eligible for insurance. Similarly, if there was a community where insurance was available and you didn't have insurance, you were not eligible under the current disaster assistance policy, which follows the federal policy. In terms of providing support to build infrastructure for a community to get insurance, MACA currently provides infrastructure funding to the communities on a regular basis through regular channels. There's no other funding available for them to, put in fire hydrants, as was mentioned. It's up to the community to prioritize what's required in their own communities and to use the funding that's currently provided for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Yakalaya, you have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you to the minister and the staff for your presentation. My internet is very unstable, so I might cut in and out. Given that we're in the early stages right now, it's but we've seen there have been evacuations right now in northern part of Alberta, so things are starting to happen. And all of these questions are really relevant and really good to listen to. My question is, I have a whole bunch of questions. So I'm trying to figure out which one is the best one to give, to get the question answered. Communities, the question that Jane just asked about, and the no insurance, and then now you're looking at since we're in the beginning stages of the, I'll say opening stages of the fire season. does the department have a plan for, in the Detroit year, we've had all these fires last year, the mushrooms are coming up. So do you have a plan for when we have a huge number of people entering into the territory, and if we should have an emergency in the Detroit area, is there a plan for if you have exhausted all the resources and people need to get evacuated and we have people from the south, because that's where people are going to come from to pick mushrooms, do you have a plan in place that is able to, we're all able to evacuate if that happens? We're praying that that doesn't happen, but do you have a plan in place for that? Thank you.
Ms. King.
Hi, thank you. So community emergency plans should speak to residents and visitors within the community. And so community emergency plans and the supports available through the NWT emergency plan would be applicable to any visitors to the community. As far as plans for mushroom pickers, ITI may have a plan in place, but yeah, thank you. That's all I'll say.
Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just to add with the insurance part, I know there's lots of questions about insurance and some of the things I've just recently learned, having talked to a couple residents in Hay River, it's almost impossible to get insurance at sometimes. So I think what's important to bring across to everybody is even if you can't get insurance, it's important to try. And if you don't get it, at least get a letter stating why you couldn't get the insurance. And even to the point of where it's not affordable, right? Like if it's just too expensive for your income to get the insurance, even something like that would help, just to have that documentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Ms. Yakalaya.
Thank you for that. What I'm asking is because if there's an emergency plan with MACA and all the departments have emergency plan, I'm saying as if we've exhausted all the resources, there's only one road coming into the north. We all know that. So there's only one road coming in, and if there's a fire in the south somewhere again that blocks off the highway, are we going to have the resources available to get everybody out safely? Should this happen, we're praying it doesn't happen. But is MACA ready to go with ITI and other departments to ensure the safety of the NWT residents? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yakalaya. Ms. King.
Thank you. So in the event a community government needs assistance with something like an evacuation, the NWT emergency plan articulates the mechanism. As part of our standard operating procedures and our preparedness efforts behind the scenes, we do have some standing offer agreements in place for things like movement of people and equipment that can be stood up very quickly. So those plans and those contingencies, we revisit annually. We continue to build on those to ensure we're ready to support local authorities when requested. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Committee, we have time for one more question, and I will give it to Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one major gap that I see in the plan is that I don't see any mention anywhere of the underhoused population or those residing temporarily in shelters such as domestic violence shelters, particularly in the case of an evacuation. There is vague language around how local authorities are responsible for vulnerable populations, and that NGOs are supposed to come up with their own emergency plans. But if there's an NGO that is housing people, whether it's Avens, whether it's the women's shelter, whether it's a supportive living facility. In order to come up with a plan, they need to know what kind of resources and support they have access to or can depend on. You know, are they planning an airlift? Is there going to be money coming from somewhere for that? So my question is, in the case of an evacuation, who is responsible for ensuring the safety, transport, and continued support for the underhoused population? And has the GNWT formally responded to, for example, Avens came up with a list of detailed recommendations about what they need in going forward in terms of arrangements to be made ahead of time, resourcing arrangements, contracts with the GNWT before they could be prepared for a future emergency. So yeah, the first question in terms of who is responsible, and then secondly, what specific things has the GNWT or MACA done to work with nonprofits or those taking care of vulnerable populations to prepare their plans? Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Ms. King?
Thank you. The answer to your first question is all vulnerable populations should be considered in community emergency plans. And the mechanism for that is the local emergency management organization. This is where NGOs, municipalities, and partners get together and discuss what is each entity's capacity and where are the gaps. So we're aware of an upcoming meeting that Yellowknife is hosting with NGOs, and it's there that discussions will take place about what are the capacity of the NGOs that support underhoused populations to effect evacuations, what are the gaps in the information needed to plan for those, what are the contingencies in place, and what are the anticipated support needs that feed into that. It's important that these plans, while they delve into the specific who will be taking care of certain populations and who will be responsible for overseeing, it's important that these plans are flexible, because each situation is different, and so whether an evacuation is conducted by road or air is often dependent on the emergency situation. So GNWT is also coordinating with NGOs funded through the GNWT in having those discussions over what is the capacity at the NGO level and what are some anticipated requests for assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. With that, the agreed to time for this hearing is expired. So, Minister, as always, you can have the last word, and then we'll wrap up. Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the committee for the opportunity to present all this. Just want to remind everybody that, you know, it is that time of year for emergencies, and it is important for everybody to be prepared, starting with individuals. And keep in mind that we all have our personal responsibilities at home also to be prepared. So that time of year, it's important just to remind everybody. And upcoming emergency preparedness week, I think it's the 5th to 11th, I think it is. So just be aware of that also. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. That concludes this the public portion of this meeting. Thank you to everyone who tuned in online, and committee will take a short recess. Thank you.